Welcome all today, and good to see many of you joined us for this interesting session about the new bullet car sharing. My name is Rolf Hellemans. I'm the Secretary General of the MaaS Alliance, and I'm happy to host but also to facilitate this session for you. What we'll do today is we have three very interesting speakers, and they will introduce themselves. But first of all, let me guide you through a little bit what MaaS Alliance is and what we do. Just one note, this session is recorded. So if there is anything you want or need, you can always find it up a little bit later. So all is recorded and can be re-seen if you want to. Let me first go to a briefly introduction of what MaaS Alliance is doing and what we are trying to achieve to improve. 5 years ago, we started from an ITS Congress and Mobility as a Service Alliance, which is the full name, in which we really try to focus on mobility, improvement of mobility, and making sure that the output of mobility is something where we can make the world a better place for. We are now over 5 years later with more than 100 members and more than in 27 countries. So we're expanding, and what we're doing is making sure that our members and stakeholders are heard to governmental to governments, to technique, to business models, to regulations, so we can create something we all know and call a open MaaS ecosystem. So what we do is we build this open system, and we build it in a case where all our members are part and are equally entering and making sure that their interests is combined. We exchange knowledge. We exchange knowledge from also new and current elements regarding what's working. We provide insights, so we're really a learning institute and also an institute where you can compare instruments and compare outputs from MaaS. And we connect all issues, connect all problem owners to make sure that we can make this MaaS open system for everybody, by everybody. We're still developing and we're still defining to make it a complete chain. What we want to do is creating an open MaaS ecosystem is not creating one app for everybody, but we want to create one function, one open source function for everybody, so everybody can create and connect to make it accessible, to make the sharing of the data working, and to make it a combined effort so we can improve accessibility of cities and also livability of cities. It's a lot, and we are really working with a lot of people to achieve this one. We do this with many working groups. Technique and Standards is a working group where we're really focusing on APIs, data models, ticketing. Interesting for many people to make sure that the data, which is the new goal we all assume and we're all working on, but what can we do with the data? How can we make sure the data is there, and what can we learn from the data, and to even worse, to even better, what can we make from the data to get it into information, into a proposition? Governments and business models, we're really working to make the schemes working for B2B, B2C, B2G, and what is needed to implement schemes, what is needed to facilitate and create it. And at the end, we are a user-centric organization. So where are the users? What can we do with the users? And how can we inform, learn, educate end users to make sure that they are provided with the right proposition, the right options to choose from, and they choose it. Today, this session is all about user-centric and all about what we can learn and what we can provide users. So I'm very happy that we're all here and we can learn you more. The persons who are going to present you today, and the first of these is Sandra. And Sandra, please take it away.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and yeah, thanks everyone for joining the session on car sharing and the question whether car sharing is the magic bullet in the MaaS ecosystem. You should have a question box available on your interface. So if you've got any questions, if you want to contribute anything, please do share your thoughts. And we'd also like to hear from you on any just general thoughts and comments on car sharing within the MaaS ecosystem. So yeah, please share your thoughts with us. That'd be amazing. So the reason why we want to talk about car sharing within the MaaS ecosystem is that there's a lot of talk about all the new modes that are popping up at the moment. There's micromobility with e-scooters, there's cargo bikes, electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and there's a lot of hype going on in certain areas with new transport modes. But and there's also the expectation for mobility as a service to be the driver of or the facilitator to get people out of their individual cars and into other modes, and maybe even sell their individual owned cars and just rely on other modes. But is that really realistic? Because there's still so many life situations that we have where we need a car, where we can't bridge a certain gap with public transport or with a scooter or with a bicycle. So I think it's worth looking at car sharing, or car clubs as they're called here in the UK, and really analyse what do we need to do to make this a viable alternative, so that people don't need to own their own car anymore, but they can actually rely on a MaaS ecosystem with all the other modes available, but also with the easy availability of a car. And we want to look at sort of best practice examples, research, and we've got great speakers who are going to share their experience as well. So yeah, let's start with maybe just to quickly introduce the speaker. So we've got Antonia Roberts here, who's the Deputy Chief Executive of comouk UK, and Anna Reifer Darlingen from Germany. Anna is the Research Assistant at the Institute for Transport Studies at the Karlsruhe Institute for Technology. And Karlsruhe supposedly is the capital of car sharing. We'll come back to that later. But we'll start with Antonia, who's going to share her thoughts on the world of car sharing with us.
Hi, everybody. I believe my screen will be sharing in a minute. You can get to see my slides, but while that magic is happening, just a little bit about us and comouk UK. So comouk UK is a charity. We're based in the UK. We've been around for over 20 years, helping to develop the basis of shared transport, but particularly, here we go, get my slides up. Okay, let me know if you can't see that. I hope you can.
Yeah, we can.
Car sharing. Yep, it's car sharing, the magic bullet. So yeah, comouk UK, we're a charity. We're there to kind of represent and develop the shared transport in the UK. We've been working on car sharing for over 20 years, so this is really nice to sort of see the spotlight on this when, like Sandra says, there's lots of emphasis on new modes at the moment. And we do it primarily through working with networks like the MaaS Alliance does, bringing together those that operate and those that look after the public space and the different stakeholders in between there. And we have a whole wealth of guidance and research and so forth to call upon. So I'm happy to kind of direct you to our website later. So, okay, car sharing. We all use, or the vast majority of us use a car in some form for some forms of trips during the year at least. And to do this, there's kind of crudely two different ways in which you can go about it. You can either own a car or you can get access to a car. So if you own a car, you then have the sunk costs and the convenience of it sitting on your doorstep, which is massive incentive to carry on using that car for all of your trips. But if you arrange to just get access to a car, you're then each time thinking about which is the best mode for each of the different trips, and thinking about the price, the convenience, and perhaps the environmental impact of each of those decisions. So basically, in order for MaaS to succeed, I'm suggesting that car sharing is the magic bullet, because unless you find a solution to needing the car, people will return to that ownership model and continue to use that model for all of their trips. So we know from looking at the research at comouk that we do with users, that when we ask people about why they use car sharing, they typically tend to be pretty low users of the car. But when they do use it, it is for specific trips that have to be in a vehicle of some sort. Typically things like carrying bulky items, or because there's no public transport options, or because they're moving family while they're traveling. And if we ask them what they would do if they hadn't had access to the car sharing car club, they'll typically cite other types of vehicles like car hire, friends' car, taxis, etc., which is fine and great and could help to support a MaaS initiative as well. But if it's not got the convenience that car sharing can, that's slightly closer to car ownership in itself, it might become a headache and eventually lead people back to car ownership itself. So we want the kind of convenience of having easy to access self service hire on every street, really. And there's a real natural synergy between car sharing and public transport modes and other sustainable modes. So we know from asking people that typically car club members are higher users of public transport than the average. This is UK figure, 61% versus 19%, and they're more likely to cycle than the average person in the UK. So they're already kind of perfect customers, and car share members need good quality public transport and alternatives, and MaaS needs car sharing in order to facilitate people to shift over to these modes. And we know that also from our research that this leads people to either sell existing cars, maybe the first or maybe just a second car, but a displacement of a car, or avoiding buying a car, which again helps to reduce the number of private cars on the road and supports the development of sustainable modes and making them more successful. So how do we make car sharing work really well? Well, to me, it's all about the ecosystem in which it sits in. So without the policies and the practice in place to restrict private car use, there's never going to be that right environment for car sharing to succeed. So be that reducing access to certain areas of the city, maybe it's the cost of parking your car at home or at work, but there has to be some form in which you're leveling that playing field so that the private car doesn't have the best most competitive option for people to use. And again, so you need the quality alternatives as well, be that kind of amenities that are in walking distance, be that really good cycling routes or convenient integrated transport. You need a really good network of cars, so we want car clubs on every corner of every street, so that people have a choice of vehicles to get to and availability, and that kind of ease of access, particularly taking members of your family from home, etc. It needs to be a really good dense network of provision, and crucially, which is what we're here to talk about today, well integrated with all the other modes that you need. So moving on to talking about car sharing within MaaS and how that works differently, and what we need to consider thinking about car sharing within MaaS. Well, obviously offering somebody access to a car is very different to offering people access to a seat on a bus. There's a lot more risk involved there and a lot more logistical considerations. So things like checking a driving license, signing people up for the insurance. You might need mechanisms to take payments for fines, etc. Or you probably need more sophisticated customer service support because the questions and needs are going to be different there. So there's certainly a need for the car share operators to be heavily involved in the logistics and the background to that, because there's very particular needs. I think there's also challenges for inclusivity. I've seen quite a lot about setting really ambitious goals for inclusivity for mobility as a service, which I think is really important, but there may be more challenges around the operational side of that for car sharing, driving checks, insurance for car sharing. For some operators may not take the youngest drivers, it may not take the oldest drivers, it may not take new drivers. So you need to think about ways around that. So it might be that you set up social driving schemes like surrogate drivers where other people can help to get other people to do those specific trips. I don't have all the answers, but here's some of the challenges. I'm sure you've spent hours thinking about data sharing. I know that for the operators, it's really important that there are very clear standards, universal standards, so that there isn't that cost of time of programming to fit in with new opportunities each time, and that there's extra sensitivities around car sharing data because you've got links to people's home addresses, etc. So thinking about making sure that those standards, and I understand that this is very much the case now, include agreements in them about privacy and security and managing data. And it may be that the car sharing has very different needs, and they need to be considered in this process. A second kind of side of thoughts about how these two different worlds work well together. I think there are a number of pilots working at the moment with mobility services, and I think that's understandable. We need to understand how this whole world works really well. But when you're asking people to switch from car ownership to sharing, there needs to be that security and understanding that this is going to be there long term. Otherwise, it could be really counterproductive and give a negative impression. So there has to be that kind of commitment to be able to provide services long term. Which kind of brings me on to kind of what I think is probably the biggest issue, really, which is about how do we get people to make this big shift in their behaviour from owning a car and having it really just sitting there for whenever you need it, through to sharing. And I think it's very different to getting people to just try bike share or just getting people to try a bus, because it's a low kind of commitment and pretty intuitive to use. So I think there's a real need for incentives, strong marketing campaigns. So I think things like that have been tried in the UK with the scrappage schemes are really interesting, giving people a set of mobility credits for shifting and selling a car. But these things are kind of expensive and are not always going to be possible. So as well as that ecosystem that I was talking about before, which provides the policy levers to get people to think about shifting, one of the things I wanted to explore through a few examples was how to use third parties with marketing in order to have better communication lines with potential users, but also some potential controls as well. So I've got 3 quick examples to go through. We're involved in a project called MobiMix EU project, and one of the partners in this is Antwerp, and they've got a B2B MaaS project going on at the moment you might have heard of, and they're testing 3 different types of incentives there through working with employers. So they've already got this direct channel of communication. They've all got some form of control over what people do in terms of bringing the private car to a workplace. So there's a potential opportunities there to influence behaviour and then potentially influence what goes on outside of the employee world. Yeah, so they're testing gamification and discounts and incentives. It's all really early days. I know that they're having issues about working out who's liable for different aspects, sorting out insurance issues, and their kind of takeaway, I think, at the moment is that they really need a really strong, knowledgeable leader to manage the scheme. So it'll be interesting to see how that one develops. A second one, closer to home in the UK, is part of you're probably aware of MaaS Scotland. It's got 5 projects being developed through the MaaS Investment Fund there. The first one went live as the Go High project in the Highlands. So pretty challenging scenario with rural environments. They've got a whole range of partners involved, from ferries and 2 different bike share operators and car sharing operator. And they're helping to kind of plug those rural gaps through using car share, but also a DDRT provider as well. But I think it's really interesting to have this tourism angle as well. So as well as it being there for residents and businesses, you can then help to channel potential users' behaviour through the tourism communication channels. So directing them away from car hire towards incentives to use the Mobility as a Service app. Again, early days, so interesting to see how that develops. And the third example, I guess, is a bit of a stretch of the definition of MaaS, because it's not actually an app-based solution. We're part of another EU project called Share North, and Bremen, I'm sure you've heard of, is a real leader in terms of developing car sharing. They've got a really extensive network across the city. But what's really interesting is that they're using their powers in terms of developing new housing developments to manage how cars are used and have those controls over residents to say, no, you're not going to automatically have a car parking space, but instead we're going to give you this package of mobility credits to use on their fantastic tram system, bus, cargo bikes, car sharing, etc. So it's switching that behaviour from that kind of point at which people are moving into the area. And I'm just going to finish off by a bit of a plug for physical integration as well as digital. We've done quite a lot of work at comouk UK on mobility hubs, and I think that to really order to compete with the private car and to provide a really strong offer, you need this physical connectivity, enhanced travel experience, and it really helps to kind of raise the profile of the different modes to use the space that could be taken from removing private cars to enhance our public realm and bring the modes to the forefront of people's minds. A bit of a plug there for a report, I don't know if you're aware of, that was done by the Mobimix, the EU project that I mentioned earlier. They did a bit of a review of the mobility as a service scene and looked at various examples and lessons learned there and bring out some of the points around car sharing in there. So that might be something you want to look up as well. But otherwise, happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Antonia. That was a really great overview, and already I've got so many questions. We've got one question here that we'll take straight away because it relates to one of the statistics you mentioned, and then we'll wait with the other ones until after Anna's talk. So Lawrence is asking, what about the other 50% that would not use car hire or a friend's car? Is it about convenience for them? I think
a lot of the time, well, there's a certain percentage of people that, I think it was around 15–60% people said that they wouldn't travel at all, they just wouldn't be able to do that trip. So there's a real issue there in terms of accessibility and inclusion for society. But I think otherwise it is a real issue in terms of people having to struggle to use what modes there are, I guess mostly public transport, but in a really difficult way. So yeah, it really depends on the setting, but it's sort of creating barriers to people to accessing opportunities. I think if we don't sort of provide this mix of modes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Antonia. So I think we'll move over to Anna and hear her thoughts, and then we can dive into a extended Q&A. So Anna, do you want to tell us about your views on car sharing and what's happening in Karlsruhe?
Perfect, brilliant. Thank you for the introduction. So I don't have any slides. I'm just going to jump right into my talk. So my research actually, it's Antonia's last slide really fit very well. My first experience in researching car sharing stemmed from a project we did here in Karlsruhe about mobility hubs and how to integrate different modes of transportation, especially in rural areas, to bridge the gap between rural and city traffic. And within this project, our research mainly focused on travel behavior and car sharing usage patterns. So I will report on a couple of results from our research, but I also took a look at different research papers published in the last couple of years regarding the questions of who car sharers are, why they use car sharing, and how they use car sharing. So I will provide a quick overview over these points. So the question of who car sharers are can actually be answered really quickly, and I think it's in line with the typical MaaS user, who are usually males, rather young. So the mean age for car sharing reported across different studies is between 30 and 35 years of age. They have an above average income and are usually employed, so a very privileged group regarding income, but also education. And across all studies looking at socio-demographic information, we can see that over 3/4 of car sharing members actually hold a undergraduate university degree, which is a much higher rate compared to the rest of the population. In terms of residents, people usually, or car sharing users usually live in cities. This isn't really surprising, as car sharing services are often, at least they start out in the city and then grow around maybe more rural areas, but are predominantly offered in cities. And people are also tend to be located in places where they already are well connected to public transportation, and they often, as Antonia already said, hold public transport season tickets and are already embedded within the MaaS universe and are very comfortable within the MaaS universe. This also brings us to attitudinal factors of why people choose to use car sharing or become a member of car sharing. And then the number one reason presented across several studies is that car sharing users, and I'm sure this is true for many MaaS users as well, is that they are really comfortable in trying new things, and they're not scared of using digital technology, but also are very comfortable within the new environment of different cars and types of cars. Something that has changed a little bit in recent years, or what I've found surprising, is that in the beginning of when car sharing services arose, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, car sharing users identified themselves as very environmentally friendly, and this was sort of a factor of why they chose to become a car sharing member or use car sharing. And a more recent study now shows that actually car sharing members are now significantly more environmentally conscious than non-car sharing members, which I found rather surprising. Looking at the other factors influencing or what factors users are looking for in a car sharing service are basically boiled down to two things. First of all, car sharing users seek value for their money and convenience. Convenience is something that Antonia already really highlighted, and this was highlighted across all studies as well. Regarding the value seeking, what's really important for car sharing users is that they don't spend more money compared to when they own a private car. So affordability and the possibility to actually save money by not owning a car is a key component to driving car sharing memberships and car sharing usage. Now, convenience comes in all sorts of sizes. What car sharing users really look for is a service that just makes their life easier. This could be that parking spaces are easily accessible, that they don't have the responsibility of tending to a car, that they have a flexible use of a car. So this also implies that many car sharing users look for a variety when it comes to the vehicle fleet. So they have different trip purposes, and what provides them the flexibility of car sharing is that they can use different types of vehicles for different types of trips they're pursuing. They also really look for a sufficient supply of car sharing vehicles, and this is sort of tricky for car sharing service providers because they do like or look for an economically sound system, but car sharing users really look for having enough cars to meet their personal travel and transport needs. And this comes into play when car sharing users really look for predictability and the possibility to rely on the service. This is really important for car sharing users. The point of convenience is actually quite different for the different car sharing systems. So if we look at, I didn't really come across a lot of peer-to-peer car sharing studies. I think nowadays one-directional and station-based or round-trip car sharing services is the norm. And if we look at usage patterns between the two services, there we can see a really difference. So for station-based or round-trip car sharing services, the point of convenience is that car sharing users really need to plan and rely on the fact that they will have a car available when it's needed, and they usually need a car when they go shopping to transport their groceries or shopping goods, when they transport goods, or when they transport luggage and stuff like that. So they really look for a service that is convenient to them in terms of predictability and reliability. And about 2/3 of car sharing users of station-based or round-trip services actually book their trips at least one day in advance before taking the trip. This is opposed to free-floating or one-directional car sharers who are very spontaneous with their trips. The systems actually really work pretty differently. So the one-directional car sharing users plan their trip mostly less than 1 hour ahead of time and make a much more spontaneous decision. And free-floating car sharing is much more often used when it's when the convenience in this case is time. So they use the car sharing vehicle when it's convenient to them in terms of it's faster than the other mode of transportation. So if we think about a passenger going from A to B, and if public transportation or the bicycle is just slower, free-floating car sharing comes in and helps bridge the transport need. Yeah, so this is a very, very quick overview over the current literature and research around car sharing. I think it, from my point of view, I think it's not only the magic bullet to MaaS, but I think it's rather it could provide an open door to MaaS, as driving a car is already very comfortable and position for many people. They've already found themselves, and I think is a really good first step into the whole system of mobility as a service, because people are so used to the mode of a car, and it really helps to get started into MaaS.
Thank you, Anna. Lots of really great insights there. Antonio, if you want to come back with your camera, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. We've got one question here that I think, Anna, you already partly answered. So Aitan is asking, what are the implications of the different types of car sharing in MaaS, so station-based versus free-floating, etc.? So you already spoke to that free-floating is a more sort of spontaneous use, whereas station-based is more planned. Are there any other differences that you found?
So the usage patterns are actually quite different. For free-floating car sharing trips, we can see much shorter trips, especially because they are one way. People don't need to return the vehicles, but are often even used for commuting trips, just as an alternative to the other available transport modes. So the trips are much shorter. It depends on the system, but usually they are more expensive than the round-trip car sharing yeah, so I think for free floating, we have to be a little bit careful if they help the transport system in terms of being a supplement to public transport or actually taking trips away from public transport.
Yeah, Antonia, do you have anything to add to that?
So, we have got some research comparing the two different modes from a few years ago. We've now only got one provider in London, so it's kind of harder to publish data because it's more sensitive information. But generally, we have found that they weren't being used for commuting because of the pricing, and it's just not competitive on maybe occasionally, but not on a long-term basis. I think it just provides that kind of added convenience that you can have a big gap in your trip. You don't have to be paying for the car while you're doing your activity in the middle of it, or indeed the fact that you could actually use a different mode going there or back. So we do get people that perhaps would drive somewhere, get public transport back, or the other way around, depending on what the circumstances are. Maybe they're carrying people one way, or the timing of it, and so forth.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we've got a few more questions coming in the question box, so do keep them coming. I just want to focus a little bit more on the user as well. So I'm an ex-car sharing user. It seems the older I get, and as my sort of physical disability kind of progresses, the less environmentally friendly my travel behavior gets. And I used to, both my husband and I never owned a car until our early 40s, I think. And we were really proud of that. We lived in Sydney, inner city Sydney, and Sydney had this really great car sharing system called GoGet, who were quite a trailblazer in Australia for car sharing. We had loads of cars really close by. We had an Audi convertible for fun rides on the weekend. We had a van available if we needed to go to IKEA. We had little city hoppers. And I remember they started putting booster seats for kids into the cars as well, to make them a little bit more suitable for families. So it was really well maintained. There was the occasional hiccup of, oh, I can't find the car. What do I do now? But it didn't happen too often. Then we moved to San Francisco, and we knew we were only going to live there temporarily for a few years. And there we used the car, which was okay. It wasn't as good as the Australian system, but they had Turo, which is like a peer-to-peer sharing system. And so we were able to just rent a Mustang to drive down the coast in California. Or when we went to Atlanta, we hired a red Cadillac from someone. So we had some really great experiences with the shared car system. And then we moved to the UK, and that's where it all ended. And we bought our own car, because where we lived in London, the cars just weren't, and you both mentioned convenience a lot, the cars just weren't close enough, and there weren't enough of them as well. So it was too much effort. We've got a dog, so that really didn't work very well either, because quite often you're not, with car sharing systems, you're not supposed to take your dog. And it just didn't work for us anymore. Now I live in Bristol, and this is really interesting. I live in a brand new apartment complex. There's 2 buildings, 600 residents. There's 1 car club space, 1 dedicated space. That's it. And I'm really disappointed, I have to say, for a city like Bristol to have such small focus on car sharing, because this building, these residents here would be perfect to use car sharing, but there's only one car, which is not very practical, because most of the time it will be booked out and then you just stop using them. So I really want to drill down on this sort of convenience factor, but also for the different user groups. So I mentioned kids and dogs. A lot more people have pets now. So you need to be able to transport your pet. You need to be able to transport your children. And also cars need to be accessible for different needs. So have you got any sort of insights in those areas? Is there sort of movement or improvement happening, or are there any interesting pilots maybe?
Shall I start? I mean, actually, Bristol's one of the better cities in the UK, so it's really kind of worrying to hear that. I think a lot of it comes down to politics and the fact that car sharing is just not being prioritised. It's certainly virtually no funding. Often operators are charged permit costs and are seen as you know, a lucrative business rather than something that's just kind of surviving. So we need to be braver in terms of putting those restrictions to private car ownership in place, which then creates the environment for car sharing to succeed and to grow. Otherwise, at the moment, it is sort of the provision is just sitting in very kind of small pockets and in niche areas. And I think in terms of expanding the opportunities for wider groups of users, I think that comes with greater, as schemes grow, as there's more competition, it's possible then to kind of bring in additional services like kids seats, etc. I mean, for a startup, if you have a greater provision, you're going to be closer to your own homes to potentially use your own kids seats. But I have seen circumstances where lockers have been provided with some as well. I think there was actually a scheme in Bristol quite a long time ago where they had a wheelchair accessible cars, but they were reliant on funding, and the funding ended. And so unless the whole business is thriving and doing well, you're not going to be able to provide those additional add-ons, because at the moment it's just really kind of pushing to survive at the moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. Anna, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, well, so from more of an anecdotal point of view from Karlsruhe here, where the situation is rather well. So we have a lot of, compared to other cities, have a lot of car sharing vehicles per inhabitants, and the city now, I think, has started to support it more as the service grew, and now there are parking privileges for car sharing users. You can park in areas where there's usually no external parking allowed, and you could just leave the car there. And yeah, they have also started to put booster seats into the cars. And yeah, I think it's what Antonia said. It's the more the service grows, the more you can implement more features. But I think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem, because if it's a private service that is without funding and needs to really make money from the users, they provide as many cars as are currently used, and you need a lot of cars for people to actually feel that it is a convenient alternative to their own car.
Yeah,
and probably make it, sorry, what I just thought about, I think what helped here is that it became really painful to own and drive a car in Karlsruhe for a certain number of years because of construction. And I think that actually really helped people get rid of their own car and then switch to an alternative when they needed it. So you have to sort of make it painful for the people to own their own cars. And I think probably parking privileges is one factor where cities and yeah, policymakers can really chime in.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you have to sort of tip the balance between the convenience of grabbing your car keys compared to booking the car share, and for that you have to make the own car experience, as you said, a bit more painful. That's really interesting. We've got a lot more questions coming in. So Malin is saying there will soon be a great car sharing in Bristol. Stay tuned. This fall it will happen. Well, I'm very excited about that. Thanks for letting us know. I'll keep an eye out. And then Malin also says the problem with booster seats is that they will be forbidden in the EU in 2024. So how can families make car sharing work? If someone just had a baby or has, you know, 2 toddlers, how do they fit into the system?
Well, I think it's probably a good opportunity to talk about peer-to-peer sharing, which I think is really kind of taking off in the UK at the moment. And it's a model which I think economically it is easier to grow, because you're using existing resources and people have already committed to those, you know, existing resources. So actually then sharing the cost of it is and it's an easier transition for many people to make as well. There's a really interesting scheme, I think, that's been highlighted in the press a little bit in Oxford, where they're actually developing closed community peer sharing as well. So they're actually setting up a network of peer-to-peer sharing, but within 2 or 3 streets, so like neighborhood sharing. And therefore you really kind of you really know those sort of 20, 30 people that are sharing maybe those 3 or 4 cars. So actually sharing things like booster seats, etc., is perhaps, you know, a lot easier. And I know that within those systems they have some cars that will allow dogs and some that won't, because, you know, you've got pet owners and not pet owners. So I think that's potentially a solution. You know, we can all share a car with a neighbour. It doesn't need to be a formal system.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, without actually having any children, the only thing I can think of is probably the convenient factor is, again, where the cars aren't located too far away, so it's not as much of a hassle to get the children and the seats and the whatever else you've going on to the car. So the access trips, yeah, shouldn't be too long to the car sharing vehicle.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, we've got a lot more questions coming in here. So Connell is asking, what are the governance challenges for MaaS and car sharing, and how do you manage quality of service? Who would like to talk about that?
It would be probably useful to know a bit more about what they're thinking about in terms of the governance. I think there are certain aspects of managing car sharing which have to remain with the operator. There is a real willingness to integrate with services like mobility as a service because of the opportunities that are there, but certain aspects I think have to be managed locally. And I think there is an opportunity there, though, to influence the service, to set different parameters, all that, and I have seen scenarios where that's happened. Yeah, so I'm not sure I'm really helping on that question, but some thoughts.
Yeah, do you have any thoughts on governance, Anna?
I think one problem that arose here in Karlsruhe and probably other cities as well, at least in Germany, is when it's private operators. They, from the start point, they come with the same rights and like any other company. So the reservation of parking spaces was a really big problem at the beginning, because they couldn't just rent out any public parking spaces or just reserve public parking spots for car sharing, because they were just any other privately owned operator. So I think this is something where the policymakers and at least in terms of private operators really have to work together and yeah, find a way to make this work.
Yeah, I think this is where I guess local councils in a way have to step in and provide the space and cooperate with the private operators. Yeah. Thank you. And then we've got Aitan is asking any insights in how to actually offer car sharing within MaaS, for example, via bundles or pay as you go. So that's a really interesting question, because we're obviously looking at car sharing from a MaaS perspective. So we want to keep that multimodal mix that offers people that sort of flexibility. And but I mean, I guess it really depends on the MaaS model that is on offer in a particular region or city, and it can probably be either. Have you seen anything there, Anna, in Karlsruhe? How is that handled?
Yeah, within the project I mentioned earlier, this became available. So within the project, there was a development of a smartphone app, and you can actually use car sharing without being a member. So you only have one MaaS account for the app, and you can use e-scooters and bike sharing and public transport and car sharing within the same app. And it's actually an intermodal routing service as well. And I think this really lowers the effort to use car sharing. I think one problem that they had to face was checking of driver's license. I think that didn't go away, so you still have to. That's probably like a special situation for car sharing because you have to have a valid driver's license. But other than that, I think that was really step forward to making it really convenient and with less effort.
Mm.
I think my thoughts on it would be that you would want a flexible set of credits within the system, which could be used across any mode, because if you set a certain amount of credit for the car sharing element, you're kind of pushing people to choose that element rather than to always choose the best element for the, you know, the best mode for the day. I think we've come across it in new developments where there's been bike sharing and car sharing provided, and with bike sharing, you may well in a management fee say, okay, you get 2 hours free bike sharing a week as part of your management fee. You wouldn't necessarily want to set a specific for car sharing. I think you'd want to kind of keep that flexible across modes.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. Right, we're coming to the end of our hour. Just very quickly, you mentioned the necessity for driver's license, Anna, but maybe one day we're going to have an autonomous car share fleet, and then nobody needs to have a driver's license anymore. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this is great for younger people, but I think it will increase the gap of enthusiasts of new technology even further, and people who are just really comfortable in their current environment. I think this is needs even more marketing and effort to bring the service to the people. I think we need more marketing for car sharing, but I think even more would be necessary for autonomous vehicles. Especially older people are reluctant, I think, to try out services like that.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, we're at the end of our session. Thank you so much, Anna and Antonia. Do you have any sort of closing statements on car sharing for our audience, who's obviously quite interested in the topic? Anything you want to pass on to them? Antonia, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think the theme for what I've been trying to say today is that there's a real need for those restrictions, that the sticks, not carrots, not just carrots. We need some great incentives as well, but the restrictions in the whole ecosystem. If we're not brave there, then all of the amazing, technically sophisticated work that's done in terms of providing alternatives is wasted, I think. But on a more practical note, I would say, talk to car share operators. They have very particular needs, and I think that early conversations is important to make sure that the integration will work well.
Yeah, thank you. What about you, Anna?
Yeah, so from reading the papers and looking at the socio-demographic profiles, I think increasing incentives and maybe making it more accessible, having sort of trial periods for the users could really help other user groups to start using car sharing, or at least try it out and see all the great benefits. If it's a good service, I think we could actually extend the service to other user groups, and that would really help.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you so much both for sharing all your thoughts and your expertise. I think that painted a really good picture on where car sharing fits in within the MaaS ecosystem, but also what we still need to do to make it work better. So I think there were some really interesting pointers in there. And Rola, if you came back, do you want to close the session and maybe point out some future activities for the MaaS Alliance?
Yes, that's exactly what I was supposed to do. Thank you, Antoine and Anna, for your good input on car sharing. Within the MaaS ecosystem, it's very important that all modes, especially car sharing, active modes, are connected on an easy way. So the accessibility to use these services are very interoperable, so everybody can use it on a very flexible way. By doing this, and you just mentioned accessibility, but also clear visibility where they are and low barriers to use it, we really try to involve more modes. And I think most of the people within the MaaS industry and the MaaS eco chain are a big fan of usage of assets instead of owning of assets. And I heard many cars flying by today, which is great, but that's what you really want to have and achieve. So thank you all for this session. Thank you all for your insights, information as well.
I think you just went on mute, Roloff. I can't hear you anymore.
Time I'm pressing on, that's right.
That's better.
What we're doing within the MaaS Alliance is we continue with our sharing information. We will continue with our social media on all these impacts and make sure that everybody is able to receive the information required and needed to make sure that this ecosystem is working for everybody. And to be honest, we are at the current moment working quite hard to make a more accessible library of what are all the projects and what are all the inputs which we are using and what are the outputs, so we can combine the efforts we are all taking into MaaS and see what's working from a provider point of view, but also from an authority point of view or from a user point of view. So we're trying to collaborate all these projects to make sure it's accessible and we can learn from it. What we will also do in the coming period, but that's mainly focusing on the governmental point of view. So we will joining the ITS European Congress, where we will get a MaaS summit in which we introduce some new elements as well, but mainly focusing on the authorities, what's needed. I also heard something about competition. Fair competition is very relevant, but also making sure that the decision how you want to use your public space is a fair decision, which can be offered as a proposition. Those elements we will discuss during an ITS Congress in 30th of May. And what we also do, because it's very important that it's not only us, what we all want to do, and we all want to work together to make this a better world. We will also make the MaaS Alliance voice, or the on-demand voice as we call it in America, also over there to make sure that we are aligning all industry and all elements to learn from each other and to see what we can do. So we will participate the World Congress, ITS World Congress in Los Angeles as well to communicate our message, meaning how can we serve better cities and how can we serve users to have a livability city with an accessibility of all mobility and all the choices there are. So I'm looking forward to more of these web sessions, more of these webinars, more internal information on what we can do, what we can achieve. Most important, I'm looking forward to collaborate with you. And I want to thank you all for joining. I want to thank you all for participating. Sandra, Anna, Antoine, thank you very much. And I think we can close this if there are no questions. Anna, if there is anything, or Sandra, if there's anything, I'm not sure.
No, I think we're perfectly on time, and yeah, we're at the end of our session. So thank you, everyone, and hope everyone has a good rest of the day.
And we will send the link from this recording to everybody, I think, Julia, and we will communicate this one as well. So you will get the feedback from this session as well. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day and speak to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.